The Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens. We're coming to the end of 2012, and sadly, this is the last edition of a very eventful year. Welcome to Question Time. Good evening, and a particularly big welcome to our audience here in Bristol and to our panel, the Secretary of State for International Development, Justin Greening, the Shadow Home Office Minister for Labour, Stella Creasy, the founder of Cobra Beer and a crossbench member of the House of Lords, Lord Billimoria, the author and professor of contemporary thought at Brunel University, Will Self, and the columnist at the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens. Your morning paper may have said, and if you read the Times newspaper, would indeed have said that James Harding, the editor of the Times, was going to be on the panel tonight. But sadly, he announced today that he was resigning from the editorship, and he rang me and said, unfortunately, he couldn't, therefore, come on the panel. We hope to have him back in some other equally distinguished guise some other day. So let's go on to our first question. And I do have just to remind viewers, because I was asked it tonight by our audience here, our panel here do not know the questions that are going to be put to them. Do you? Any of you? No. Oh. Thank you very much. and the first question comes from Warren Birch, please.
Is the large number of Tory MPs opposing gay marriage symptomatic of a party out of touch with contemporary society?
The large number of Tory MPs opposing gay marriage, proposed and, of course, endorsed by the Prime Minister. Will Self.
It's not particularly out of touch. I think the figures are about 55-45 on the marriage issue, 55 in favour, 45 against. By and large, people are in favour of civil partnerships, but there seems to be this view abroad that marriage is only made of a man and a woman, whatever they may be, and that you can't get married if you're of the same sex. And a lot of people seem to go back to, particularly, I think, the Gospel according to Mark and one of the other Gospels in order to, you know, establish this fact that it has to be a man and a woman. But it's interesting that these people, and some of them are Tory MPs, seem to want to literally interpret this particular bit of scripture. But there are other bits of scripture that they're quite happy to disregard, like the creation of the earth in 7 days, and actually resting on the seventh day. That would be good. They're perpetually working. So I rather mistrust this surge in biblical literalism that seems to grip the anti-gay marriage lobby. I mean, if you're asking my personal opinion, I think just about anybody should be allowed to get married to anybody else. But there you go.
Justin Greening.
Well, I very much agree with Will. It's something that I've certainly thought a lot about.
With the questioner or with Will?
With Will's answer, I think that there is a real breadth of opinion both in the Conservative Party, but I think generally across Parliament, and there'll be a free vote on it. It's something that I've had to consider. And from my perspective, I think, as Will does, I think if people want to get married, I think they should be allowed to get on and do that. I think as long as we've got the right protections in place for churches that don't want to allow gay marriage, I think that's fine. And I think that then respects everybody's right to get on with their life the way that they want to.
Why should gay couples be entitled to either a civil partnership or marriage, whereas heterosexual couples are only entitled to get married, not to have a civil partnership?
I don't think there's a lot of demand. Certainly, I've never had a constituent who's heterosexual ask me why they can't have a civil partnership with their partner. So I don't think there's an awful lot of demand for civil partnerships for heterosexual couples. I think the question is whether we're willing to give gay people equal rights in terms of being able to get married. And I just think, having spent a lot of time thinking about it, that it's the right thing to do. And I just don't think that we should stand in the way of two people who want to make a lifetime commitment to one another. I think as long as we're clear that we don't force churches and people of faith who don't feel comfortable with that to have their own churches having to do marriages, then I think you get everybody able to able to have their own rights to live their life how they want to.
The question was about the 100 or so Tory MPs who oppose it and whether this is symptomatic of a party out of touch. I mean, you've got the Prime Minister going for it, but a large number of backbenchers of his backbenchers against.
I very much respect their opinion. I just reached the conclusion that I disagree with it.
Aren't they just homophobic, these 100 MPs? That's what it looks like to me. They just don't like gay people. Isn't that sort of, you know, it's the principle of Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is they don't like gay people. I mean, get over it, you know, as Matt Lucas might say.
The woman up there on the back, on the left, yes.
I think it's actually a travesty that they've tried to kind of enact this liberalising, accepting policy on the surface, but then they've announced that within the Church of England and the Church of Wales, it's illegal to force these churches to enact a ceremony. And I think that, yeah, that's just basically them creating a loophole to kind of continue pandering to the homophobic, prejudiced sections of the people that are within that party and that support that party. Yeah, and I think that that's a travesty in our day and age in a liberal, progressive, democratic society.
It's going to be illegal for the Church of England to perform... Peter Hitchens.
Oh, well, if you want to know why the Conservative Party is out of touch with the people who once were Conservatives and would like to vote for it, and the reason why the Conservative Party is dying on its feet and has almost no members, it's nothing to do with this. It's because the Conservative Party is in favour of the European Union, the Conservative Party is against punishing criminals, the Conservative Party is in favour of the failed comprehensive experiment in education, the Conservative Party is in favour of mass immigration. That's why the Conservative Party is out of touch. The issue of same-sex marriage is so immensely trivial and unimportant. It's only raised as a wind-up to draw poor, silly old Conservatives out of their caves so that they can be made to look like bigots and fools and howled at and jeered at as homophobes by people.
Why would the Prime Minister want to do that?
Why would he want to do that? Because he hates his party. And he hates most of the members of it. And
he wants to drag them down to defeat.
He loves to appeal to the Guardian newspaper and the BBC by bashing his own party and having rows with it. And that's the sole purpose of this. I don't imagine he cares in the slightest about the issue, but maybe he does, but I don't see... He doesn't care about anything else or believe in anything else, so it would be a change if he did. Mr. Slippery behaves like this. He just tries to wind up what's left of his own party because he thinks that's his only future, to make the people, to make the liberal bigots who genuinely hate and loathe people with conservative moral opinions and have no time for them at all and misrepresent them and lie about them, to make them think he's a good thing. That's his purpose. OK. Justine Greening is seething with rage and wants to come to the defence of her leader here on my right, so I'll let you briefly do that before I...
I think what David Cameron's trying to do represents a broad strand of what the Conservative Party is about today. And just to come back to your point about the Church of England and Wales, the reason that there's got to be a law in place is because at the moment the Church of England and Wales does not want to allow same-sex marriages, and because of the way in which they're set up within our country, we therefore have to put that into law. But if they did want to allow it, then we would, of course, be quite happy to change the law for them to do that. So I think what we're trying to do is make sure that every religious organisation has the ability to make its own choice about whether it wants to allow same-sex marriages or not.
They're the established church. I mean, they are the established church. Their bishops sit in Parliament, and you know,
they should have the choice as well as any other
be an established church.
Stella Creasy.
It's an incredibly ironic situation, isn't it, that all these people who claim that they're liberals, who claim that they care about conservatism, when it comes to something like this, which is one of the most traditional conservative with a small c things within our society, to make a commitment to somebody for life, they don't want it. It seems like people want to be a kind of small state liberal in the treasury, but a big state liberal in the bedroom, telling people what kind of relationship they want to have. You know, I think that everyone in my community who wants to make a commitment to each other, a really serious, loving commitment, should be able to do so. I don't think it should be up to the state to decide how they do that. I think we should let religious organisations do it. But can I just say, Justine, it is disappointing, and I speak as a member of the Church of England, to see the legislation cast in this way, because actually there is a precedent about how the Church dealt with priests who did not want to remarry people who were divorced, about making sure they were not required to do so, rather than explicitly banning it. Now, I respect that the Church of England is in this place at the moment, but I hope at some point we come to a different place, and I think it would be sad if that were to happen in the next 10 to 15 years, if we'd have to wait to legislation to make that happen. I just think the state should back out of this and let people who want to get married and show their love for each other equally, without it being about gender, with making it about love and commitment.
Okay.
I was going to say, isn't the issue less about 100 or so Tory MPs and more about a church that won't let gay people get married and won't let women be bishops? Seems...
Hang on, Peter.
I'm hanging on.
Sorry, hang on for a bit longer. Karen Billamoria.
We've had civil partnerships now for some time, and that seems to be working really well. And they have not been allowed to call themselves married. Well, to me, that's semantics. They are married for all practical purposes. They've made that commitment. And now, if we want gay marriages, same-sex marriages in religious establishments, if religious institutions and establishments want to do that, we should allow them to do that. But what we should never do is force anyone to do that if they don't want to. And the people that are objecting to this, not because they're homophobic, quite often it's because of their own religious beliefs. And what I love about this country is we're such an open country. We don't tolerate other religions. We celebrate the multicultural, secular society.
Is your church, the Zoroastrian Church, in favour of gay marriage?
It's not about my church, your church. If somebody does not want to, if a religion doesn't want to allow it, for whatever reason, we should not force it. That's the sort of open country that we are.
And what is the position of the Zoroastrian Church on the issue?
The Zoroastrian Church, on the whole, is a very liberal church. I don't know about where they would stand on this, but again, I would never force them to do anything, like we wouldn't force any religion to do anything.
OK, you, sir, in the third row there.
Well, I don't trust Miss Greening or Mr Cameron when they give assurances that those churches that don't wish to be involved in this won't have to be. I think that's either naive at best or disingenuous at worst.
In what way? You think they'll find themselves up against the wall?
I suspect that there is absolutely no way that the European Court of Human Rights will stand for a situation if marriage is redefined, whereby a religious institution is prepared to offer marriage to one eligible section of society, i.e. straight couples, but not another. I think that the European Court of Human Rights will have absolutely no truck with that.
And your view on the issue of gay marriage? In favour or against?
I believe, with the greatest of respect to homosexual couples, that same-sex marriage is ontologically impossible.
Okay.
I think that...
Ontologically impossible? You mean you don't think it's real?
I don't think that it can exist by its very nature. So, for example, I don't believe that... It was interesting what you said, Will, in the very start of your answer, actually, that you would be happy for virtually anyone to marry virtually anyone else. Well, just in the same way that I don't... And the natural extrapolation of that is that we could arrive at a situation where very close relatives can marry each other. Or...
Sorry, it's not. It's not at all, sir. It's a complete misnomer to suggest that somehow there's an equivalence. We're talking about two people making a commitment to each other, making a loving commitment to each other. That's what marriage should be about. That's what my church teaches me marriage should be about first and foremost. It's that love and commitment. It's not about the gender of the person involved.
All right. The woman in the yellow pullover.
Who is the head of the church, God or the government? On the one hand, you're saying that... Well, there you go. The church that I go to...
It's an established church. It's an established church.
The biblical definition of church, God is the head, not the government. And the problem that you're having here is when the government seeks to lead the church. So therefore, it stops following its constitution, which is the word of God, which is the Bible, and starts following the government. No, so I think that gentleman is correct. In a decade or so from now, when the touches have changed and and it stops being about same-sex couples and maybe close relatives, we'll be here having the same debate. You cannot stretch the word of God to accommodate your own ideas. You either are for, you are against. You've said love and commitment towards a couple. What about love and commitment towards your God? If I stand and say that I love God and that I do not believe that marriage between a same-sex couple is correct, I'm called homophobic. I'm called every name under the sun. You don't tell me that I don't love or I'm committed to God. You call me a homophobic. So what does that make you? You celebrate your beliefs, but I can't celebrate mine.
Just agree. Yes.
I think the response and the questions we've had back from the audience shows why it's so important to make sure we've got all the right protection in place to make sure that churches that don't want to do same-sex marriage don't have to. I completely respect your views, and I respect the views of the gentleman behind as well. It's one of the reasons why making sure we've got these safeguards in the bill that goes through Parliament is so important, so that your church is never in the position where you're being forced into doing same-sex marriage in a way that you don't want
to. But it's actually being made illegal, isn't it, for the Church of England?
For the Church of
Supposing
England,
a priest in the Church of England wants to marry a gay couple.
Well, that will be a matter.
But
that's a debate for the Church of England to have, in the same way as this lady talks about.
You're making it illegal, aren't you, if I understand it?
We could make it permissive rather than exclusive legislation. We could allow the Church to come to its own decision. We could get the state out of these decisions rather than specifically excluding it. What you're doing.
Why do we have a state church?
Well, maybe if I can just...
Well, no, you're an Anglican. It's an established church.
All right.
Let me see if I can answer Stella's point. The reason we need to structure the law the way that we have is in response to making sure that Church of England, and indeed vicars and priests in the Church of England themselves, are protected from having legal cases brought against them. If the Church of England, and it's a debate for the Church of England to have, if they want to allow same-sex marriages, then that's a debate for them to have, and to then see that reflected in the bill.
What we're saying is there's a different way in which you could do this, which would mean that you wouldn't exclude it, but you wouldn't require it. You can give them the protection without this kind of debate where people see the Church of England as wanting to exclude people wholeheartedly. You would give the space for the Church to make that decision in time, rather than us in Parliament making it for them.
So
what I'm saying, Stella, is that we've looked at that, and that didn't provide good enough safeguards for some of the concerns. But of course, we'll have a debate in Parliament.
So to protect people in the Church of England who don't want to do gay marriages, you have to make it illegal for the Church of England to have gay marriages, thus preventing people in the Church of England who do want to celebrate gay marriages from celebrating them.
Essentially, it's making sure that the decision around... Well, it's making sure that the decision around whether we have same-sex marriages in the Church of England and Wales is a matter for that church, and it's not for the state.
Do you know how many people in this country, as a proportion of the population, are in civil partnerships? 1/5 of 1%. It is an extraordinarily small issue, affecting an extraordinarily small number of people, at the same time as we've just learnt from the census that marriage as an institution in general in this country is rapidly diminishing, and more people are not married for many, many reasons, mainly the result of government actions which have weakened it. Now, here we are arguing about this. What is actually going on here is not a liberation of homosexuals. It's an attempt to impose on the whole of society a new bigotry under which those who happen to hold the opinion that homosexual marriage should not take place will not just be excluded from the centre of things, they will increasingly be hounded and treated as pariahs, just, in fact, as homosexuals were treated before the 1967 law was rightly repealed. There is an immense, furious liberal bigotry, expressed actually by Mr. Self earlier on this evening when he said...
Yes, we will
he said quite falsely, he said quite falsely that people who were against homosexual marriage didn't like homosexuals. This extremely unpleasant lie is repeatedly told by those who do not wish to debate this subject and who would hound anybody who stood in their way out of it with abuse and lies. And this is the problem which our country faces. There is a new liberal bigotry which will not tolerate...
Don't propose to a gay man.
Will not tolerate and increasingly wishes to suppress conservative
Do you think we're going to be arresting you in toilets, Peter, and subjecting you to kind of aversion electroshock therapy in order to get you back to your
do you know what, Will? I think that the time is coming when people who have conservative Christian opinions will actually face persecution of one kind or another. It hasn't come yet, But the problem is that we have become so willing in this country, and conventional wisdom has become so willing, to accept the liberal majority and the ideology of equality and diversity, which is now compulsory in all public services in this country, which you have to abide by to work in the public services,
all right,
that the freedom to speak and think otherwise is increasing.
Let's move on to another question.
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Peter. Let's move on. You can, of course, as you know, you can join in this debate through Twitter. Our hashtag is BBCQT. We've got a Twitter panellist tonight called Full Fact. Full Fact is an organisation which specialises in fact-checking claims made by politicians and the media. So the panel had better watch out. Perhaps we should always have full fact, checking what they say as we go along. And you can also, you can find them, by the way, on the BBC Extra Guest account, I think it is. Or you can text comments as you like to 83981, press the red button, you'll see what other people are saying. Let's have a question from Andrew Jardine, please.
With almost 3 million more foreign residents since 2001, is Britain no longer British?
3 million more foreign residents and 13% of people in Britain now born outside the UK. Is Britain no longer British? Karen Billamoria.
I came to this country as a 19-year-old from India to study. And this has been a most amazing country that's given me the opportunity to not only study, but to start up my business, to build a life over here. And what I've seen is the transformation of this country over the last 3 decades, from a country with a glass ceiling, where if you were a foreigner, you couldn't get to the top, you were told you will not be allowed to get to the top, to a country where I believe now is a true meritocracy, where there's opportunity for all, regardless of race or religion or background. And I've seen this unfold in front of my eyes. I think it's the most amazing country, and I think immigration, good immigration, has been fantastic for this country. And a lot of the immigrants that have come here have done it with nothing. I mean, this year we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Uganda nations, who were thrown out by a brutal dictator, Idi Amin, 40 years ago. Look at what that community has achieved over here.
But the question is Britain no longer British? How would you answer that?
And then you talk about the fact that in London now, less than 50% of Londoners are originally of ethnic origin from here. But that is wonderful, and I think it's the most cosmopolitan city in the world. And if you ask me my identity, I'm really proud to be Indian. I'm really proud to be a Zoroastrian Parsi. I'm really proud to be Asian, and most of all, I'm really, really proud to be British and what this country is now.
All right, well, Peter Hitchens, you were touching on this before, but what's your view?
Well, immigration on this scale is unprecedented in the history of this country. There has been nothing like it. And the problem with immigration on this scale is that, of course, immigrants can come here and become British if they're given the chance to do so. If the society which welcomes them says, you're very welcome here, but what we want you to do is integrate and become part of our country. Far from doing that, it's been the policy of our governments for many years to encourage multiculturalism and the creation of solitudes in which people have nothing to do with each other and live apart. And there has been that, and there has also been the fact the sheer scale of this means that there are now, I think, millions of homes. I'm sure factcheck.com or whoever they are will tell us how many millions quickly, where there are no adults who speak English. You cannot be a society unless everybody in that society shares certain things in common. One of them is language, one of them is law, one of them you might say would be a sense of humour. All kinds of things come together to make people what they are. We are considerably less British, and that's the idea. Because when New Labour launched this mass immigration policy, which they did as a deliberate act of policy, this is the account of a New Labour apparatchik, Andrew Nether, who actually said that the policy included a driving political purpose, that mass immigration was the way that the government was going to make the UK truly multicultural, and that the main purpose was to rub the right's nose in diversity and render their arguments out of date. That has been achieved. That was a driving political purpose to change this country irreversibly and out of all recognition. It's been achieved, and that lot did it. And now they're going for the next election to pose as the friends of those who are worried by it, but they aren't. They're fat bourgeois bohemians who enjoy all the parts of mass immigration, the cheap nannies and the cheap restaurants which they so love. They don't care about anybody else or what happens to the rest of the country.
Stella Creasy.
Easy, Peter. Easy. Listen, The reason I might be fat is because I went to 80 street parties during the Jubilee in my local community. I ate hundreds of pieces of cake. My local community is exactly the sort of place that Peter is talking about, that he seems a little bit frightened of. I'd love to invite you to come down and meet Walthamstow. You get a very warm welcome there, because we welcome people in Walthamstow. That's what Walthamstow originally meant in the Doomsday Book.
So kind of you.
We had... Well, Peter, this is the thing, you see. Britishness for me is about a series of values. I can travel around my country
quite freely, thanks, without being embarrassed.
No, I'm offering to welcome you to a place to come and see the kinds of things that we're talking about this evening, because we have a very diverse community in Walthamstow. Don't get me wrong, we have challenges that we have to face, but we also have a strength that comes from that diversity, because the same people who are organising all those fantastic street parties were also out there cheering on people like Mo Farah, who they saw as a classic example of what Britishness could and stands for.
What do you mean? What does it stand for you? Because that was the question. Is Britain no longer British? What does British mean to you?
I look at Mo Farah and he makes me proud, because he's a man who worked really, really hard
to rise to attention. What does because then he embodies that sense of fair play, of hard work, of tolerance and commitment to each other. And that's what we saw during the Olympics. That's what we deal with every single day in Walthamstow, because people who come from many different backgrounds share a shared concern. And Peter, you would love them, because they all get angry as soon as you talk about having a controlled parking zone. So there's plenty of things that people can find in common, wherever they come from. All right, the person who asked the question, the back there, yes.
I don't think you can define Britishness because it means different things to different people. I think immigration is a fantastic thing and enriches the fabric of this society.
Yeah.